For the next couple of weeks, our stage is going to be kind of taking a little bit different look as we begin to kind of help us look a little bit oldies but goodies. All right, in here. So I'm just saying that because if you guys have anything you'd like to add to our stage for our decorations and stuff over the next couple of weeks, let me know. I mean, what do you guys got a nice old jukebox at home? Come on, let's just put it up here. That'd be great. Anything like that would be good. But oldies but goodies, and I know when you start talking about any story in the Bible, it's an oldie, right? I mean, it has been thousands of years ago, so they're all oldies. But what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is we're going to be looking at some stories that were probably taught to most of us, if you grew up in church at all, taught us as children, stories that you're probably familiar with. In fact, even people who don't go to church are familiar with a lot of the stories we're going to talk about over the next several weeks. And we're going to look at these stories, hopefully in a new, I think, and fresh way, and kind of see how the points of these stories can apply to us, even this far removed from the initial story that took place. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know maybe what you like to do in your habits, but I like to read. I've always been a reader, and I enjoy reading stories. I have boxes and boxes of books, and now I've got a Nook. I've got books all over my tablet here. I mean, I like to read. I like to read for entertainment, not so much for education. That's just who I am, but I like to read for entertainment. And so I like to read stories with action in it. I like to read some stories with a little bit of mystery in it. I've told you guys before that, no, I'm a science fiction geek kind of a guy. I like those kind of stories. But I like to read stories with a lot of action, maybe some mystery, some courageous actions. I like that kind of stuff. And the story we're going to talk about this morning, one that you see on your notes already, is one that we're familiar with, and it's Daniel and the Lion's Den. A story that has all of these things involved in this. And when we look at Daniel and the Lion's Den, we're going to be going to Daniel chapter 6. If you want to turn your Bibles, if not, the scriptures will be on the screens also. But in Daniel chapter 6, we see the story of Daniel and the Lion's Den. Now, but let me fill you in a little bit on the background from earlier chapters. And you may know this, but let me just fill you in. Daniel, who of course was an Israelite, was captured along with several other people from Israel by the Babylonian Empire. Daniel was a very, he was a very smart, educated, good-looking, very top-of-the-line kind of a young man. And the king of Babylon, when they came in and conquered Israel, they took a bunch of these guys, a bunch of these men, these young men, and took them as slaves and moved them from Israel to Babylon. The whole goal and purpose was to train these guys like Babylonians, teach them their culture, teach them about their gods, teach them all that stuff, so that at one day they could be put in leadership in Babylon over the Israelite slaves, and then the Israelites would probably not rebel because their own people were their leaders. So the goal was to train these young men and to corrupt them into the way of Babylonian thinking, so that they then could be leaders later on. So Daniel was raised in this. Most of his life, he went as a young teenager, and through all the rest of his life, he was a slave. All right? Now, in the Babylonian Empire, he was a slave for years and years and years. Well, at one time, later on, Babylon was conquered by what was then called the Medes and the Persians. All right? In fact, Daniel had just interpreted what had just happened, this handwriting on the wall thing that had happened at this big party, and that very same night, the Babylonian Empire fell to the Medes and Persians. So the Medes and Persians come in, and they take over. And as they take over, a guy by the name of Darius was put as the king of what was then Babylonian Empire, now the new empire. So Darius is the king. And he's king over this new conquered land. And Darius starts putting some people into place so that his leadership, his authority, could be taken, could be now influencing the conquered people. And what Darius did, and I'm not sure if this was the Medes and Persians across the board or if Darius himself, but he decided in order to help him rule more effectively this huge kingdom that he just conquered, he started putting together some leadership. He took 3 people that he considered administrators, all right, which we could probably look at maybe as governors in this time period. And then he took 120 what was called satraps, and they became kind of like mayors. So each one was responsible to a governor. So he broke down the area so that he could more effectively rule without having to worry about every little spot. He had people that ruled for him. So all this was not bad. All this was probably a good idea. The problem was, though, when he came to Daniel, this guy he had met as a slave, right? Because he conquered the land. He met Daniel as a slave. and was so impressed with who Daniel was as a man that he put Daniel in charge of the entire government, all of them. The administrators, the satraps, everybody. Daniel the slave was now in charge. Okay? So this is where we get to the story in Daniel chapter 6. Because all the other administrators and the other satraps, they were not very happy about this. Because not only was a slave now put in charge of them, but none of them also got that position that they wanted and they craved, right? And so there was some jealousies and there was some anger. And because of this, they decided they were going to do everything they could to take Daniel down. And they wanted to get rid of him because he was a threat to their authority. They wanted to get rid of him. And so they decided, they got angry about it, jealousy, deceit followed, and it just went right from there. Now, there was a mathematician at one time named Dr. Madison Surratt, and he taught mathematics at Vanderbilt for a lot of years. And here's what he said. Before giving any test, he would put things in perspective for his students. By admonishing these things to his class, he would tell his class this: today I'm going to give you 2 examinations, one in trigonometry and the other in honesty, he would say. He says, I hope you will pass them both, but if you must fail one, fail trigonometry. He says, there are many good people in the world who cannot pass trigonometry. I can't pass trigonometry, okay? But he said, there are no good people in the world who cannot pass the examination of honesty. Now, when we come to the story of Daniel, this is Daniel. These people wanted to trip him up. You know, and it doesn't take long to realize, guys, that the reality, that the really important tests in life, they come long after you're out of school. They come long after you're getting graded for it, right? Many times, these tests that we have that test us in our lives, they're painful. Sometimes they're like pop exams, you know, you're not ready for them, and they take us by surprise. There's a lot of tests out there. And here Daniel had a test. And in their jealousy, the satraps here, they tried to discredit Daniel. And they did that by conducting, I'm sure, an exhaustive search of his background. At this time, Daniel's like almost 90 years old. And they searched out his background. They tried to find anything they could to prove that he was not worthy to be this kind of a leader. And they couldn't find anything. He was too much of a man of honesty and integrity. They couldn't find anything to tear him down. They couldn't do it. When he had been tested, he had passed with flying colors. So then they decided the only way they could trap Daniel was to somehow use his religious convictions against him. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if somebody wanted to tear me down and they wanted to find something bad on me, I'm not sure that my religious convictions, the way I live my life outside of these walls here at church, would be enough to get me in trouble at times if they try to do that. I think a lot of us, that may be something true in our own lives, but not Daniel. They went after his religious convictions because they knew that this was such a huge part of his life that they could do something here. And so they got creative, right? They got a little bit ingenious in action. They were very devious in what they did. The officials did this. They went to King Darius and they appealed to his pride. Here he is, this newly appointed king over this huge territory. He's a great ruler. He's got all these people that are there just to serve him. And they challenged him to issue a royal decree. One that could not be altered. One that could not be changed once he issued this. And this was a decree. In fact, if somebody were to break this, it would be an execution of them. Put in the lion's den. And here's the decree that if anybody worshipped any god but Darius, they would be killed. So here's Darius, this king, saying, yeah, that sounds good. I want everybody to worship me. I got all this power. I've got prestige. All these things. So yeah, you worship me. If you don't worship me, then you'll be put to death. They tripped him up by his pride. They got him. So he issued this unchangeable decree that said the lion's den was for anyone who would not worship him and him alone. Little did he know. And I'm sure by this time he's already created a pretty good relationship with Daniel. They've become friends. If he was willing to put him in charge of everybody, they already had a pretty good relationship going. Little did he know, though, that in issuing such an unchangeable decree, he was endangering the very life of his trusted friend Daniel. So as expected, when this decree was put out there, it took Daniel's peers no time at all to find him guilty of praying to his God and not praying to Darius. And that was it. They caught him in the act. Didn't take any time at all. And he was then convicted of violating the king's decree in order to be thrown into the lion's den. All apart from the king's desire. The king didn't want Daniel in the lion's den, but they had Daniel and they had Darius kind of on a technicality. Right? So now we see Daniel facing one of the biggest tests in his life. And as we look at this test, I want us to notice two very important lessons that we can learn from how Daniel handled this test. Okay? So now as we get to the story where we're going to be in today, in Daniel chapter 6. The first one is this. Here's your first point. I think first thing we can learn from Daniel. God's tests are often designed to confront us with our own limitations. I think a lot of times, and maybe it's just been in my life, but there's been times in my life God has used some things in my life. He has tested me at times in my life, I think, for me to realize that I'm just not all that after all. You know, I've got a lot of limitations, and I can't do it on my own, so I got to go to God. And sometimes God does that. His tests are designed to confront us with our own limitations. We go to chapter 6, verse 15, and let's read a couple of verses. It says, "Then the men," these are the satraps, okay, "went as a group to King Darius and said to him, 'Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed.' So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, 'May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you.' A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep." Okay? Here is King Darius facing his own limitations. Look, none of us like to face limitations, right? None of us do. And as the older I get, the more I find that I have more and more limitations, right? There's a story. It says, at a nursing home in Florida, a resident group, they were discussing their ailments, right? "My arms are so weak I can hardly lift this cup of coffee," said one. "Yes, I know. My cataracts are so bad I can't even see my coffee," replied another. "I can't turn my head because of the arthritis in my neck," said a third, at which several others nodded weakly, right? "My blood pressure pills make me very dizzy," another went on. "I guess that's the price we pay for getting old," winced an old man. There was a general agreement, and then a short moment of silence ensued. But then one woman replied cheerfully, "Well, it's not that bad. Thank God we can all still drive." You know? The older we get, the more limitations we have, right? And look, guys, humanly speaking, Daniel was in a spot he couldn't get out of. He was done for. Right? This was a situation without hope, no way out. He was done. He was going to die in the den of lions for his faith. That was it, humanly speaking. In fact, there were three limitations humanly, I think, that we can look at, human factors that made this situation look like there was no way out. First one was this, the law of that day. Okay? According to the law of that day, which we read, no matter who wanted to change a king's edict, a king's decree, nobody could change it. At this time, once that kingly decree had been set, and once it had been delivered to the people, it could not be revoked by anyone, including the king. He couldn't even change it. Which is one of the frustrating things here for Darius. So the law of that day, the second limitation that was there was the stone. You know, they took a stone, a huge stone, put it over the den, over the entrance into the den of lions, so that nobody could get him out. Humanly speaking, that was not going to happen. I'm sure there were guards outside, everything. There was no way Daniel was going to get out of this. Then, to make it even worse, the royal seal was put on. They put wax around the seal of that stone, and then the ring of the king, he put that ring in the wax seal. Then all his nobles and all his satraps, they did the same thing. So if that thing was moved at all, somebody would know. So, humanly speaking, there was no way out. None. But see, this wasn't just affecting Daniel. Daniel's stuck in the den, but Darius, his friend, is upset. Darius, his friend, the king, he's mad, first of all, that he got tricked by those satraps. He's upset that his friend is about to be killed. He's worried about and he makes this statement. "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." Now look, we don't read anywhere in previous chapters or anything that Darius was a believer. Okay, that Darius trusted in God the way Daniel did. We don't see that. But he knew Daniel's beliefs. Daniel lived a life that everybody knew his beliefs. So his friend, the king, knew what he believed in. He knew. And he was distressed, though. The king was distressed because his friend was in an impossible spot. So he throws out, "Hey, but even with all that, The king couldn't even help Daniel. He says, but may your God help you out. He had realized his limitations. Darius, the king, who had authority over everybody, had power over everybody, he notices, I can't do this. I can't help him, but maybe your God can. Now, you don't have to be thrown into a literal den of lions or have one of your friends thrown into a literal den of lions to experience the reality of your own limitations, right? We do that every day. We experience, I think, our own limitations. Some of us this morning, some of you in this room this morning, today, you're facing that reality that there's some limitations. I know some of you in here today feel like you're facing some personal impossibilities. There's some things in your life, and you just feel like it's impossible. And you're ready to give up because you don't see a way out. Some of you, it's an employment thing. It's a job thing. Maybe you're underemployed or you're not employed at all. And you've got ongoing financial issues and problems. And it's just, you see no way out. Some of you, it's relational. You're in a marriage and you don't see any way to fix this marriage that's about to fall apart. Or your kids are just, they're going crazy. You don't know what to do with your kids. I mean, it's a mess. In spite of all you've done, things are not improving. Things, in fact, just seem to be getting worse. And it seems like you're at your wit's end. You got limitations. Some in here today, your parents, you're worried about your children and you're concerned about their choices they're making in their future. Some it's a health problem, maybe. Maybe this is a reoccurring thing you just can't get rid of, or an addiction, or a sin. And you're just wondering, am I ever going to be able to conquer this? And we have our limitations, guys. We have them. And no matter what you do, there just doesn't seem to be a way out. No hope for change. That's your lion's den. You're in a place that looks impossible humanly. You can't figure a way out. Not now, not in the future. You're stuck. But guess what? Sooner or later, you're going to have to come to face that you have some human limitations. And you say, why? What good is that to admit that I have human limitations? Why would I want to do that? It seems counterproductive to do that, defeating to do that. But I'm telling you just the opposite. I think if you get to the point where you realize that you are weak in your own strength and you can't do it on your own, that's when you can finally lean on somebody who has all the power and has all the knowing and has all the insight what's going to happen, and you can lean on God and His power instead of leaning on your own power. But you have to get to that point sometimes where you have to face your human limitations and then rely on God. See, the truth is that I think the most spiritually productive place you could ever be is at the place where you realize, I can't do it on my own. See, God sometimes brings us into the lion's den because He loves us. He does this because He knows it is only when you come to the end of yourself that you'll ever be able to taste the joys of truly knowing His presence, truly knowing His power in your life. It's only in dying to yourself that you can come alive to God. So, in this story, I think applies to us today, the first truth you need to know is that God's tests are often designed to confront us with the reality of our own human limitations. The second thing taught here is this. God's tests are designed to lead us to a place where we depend more on Him to deliver us. See, sometimes when you get to that test, it puts you in a place where now you start depending more on Him to deliver you than it does for you to find somebody else around you to deliver you. We depend more on Him to deliver us. And we get to this story here, verse 19 to 22. We continue off the story. Here's Daniel. We left him in the lion's den. King's upset. He goes home, right? He can't sleep that night. Nothing's going on. At the first light of dawn, it says, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. He says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? He's thinking he's dead, guys. That's what he's thinking. And then lo and behold, this is what he hears. Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent His angel, and He shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in His sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, Your Majesty. Look, so he gets up. First thing he does, he runs down to the lion's den and says, Daniel, are you still there? Are you still alive? And when Daniel starts talking to him, notice, it doesn't say that Daniel climbs out of the lion's den and starts having a conversation. No, he's sitting in the lion's den having a conversation with the king outside the lion's den. The lions were all still around him. Look, if I'd been there, one of the first things I think I would have wanted to do is, hey, throw me that ladder, let me get out of here, then we can talk about what happened last night, right? But not Daniel. No, he has this conversation like it's no big deal. He's probably leaning back on a lion saying, yeah, it's pretty good down here. It's not a big deal. I've seen pictures depicting this scene of Daniel laying there with his head on a lion like a pillow, you know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know how it happened. All I know is, here it is. He is delivered from the den of lions, the limitations that, humanly speaking, he had no way to get out. And he has a conversation with the king. He had seen the angel of the Lord come and shut the lion's mouth. And again, I don't know exactly what happened in this den. All we're told is that the lions' mouths were shut. Guess what? That means to me, if they were shut, what had to have happened before they were shut? They were, anybody? They were open. Which means he's thrown that lion's den. I don't know if they starved these guys and so that they're more hungry. I don't know how that worked out. But evidently, they were very excited about Daniel coming in. Mouths were open. They were ready for their snack. And it says the angel came in and shut the lions' mouths. Now, again, not sure what all happened there, but I got a pretty good picture that Daniel was not at all uncomfortable where he was. He was pretty comfortable in the den of lions because why? He was dependent on the power of God to deliver him, not his own power to deliver him. And I was reading when I was studying for this, and there's a lot of stories, testimonies told by believers, but there was a story told of a persecuted Christian. I don't know where he was, but he was being chased by some soldiers. This is years and years ago, under orders to put him to death once he was caught. He saw a cave and he rushed in to hide there. The soldiers arrived sometime later, but as they started to go in, they noticed a spider's web across the cave entrance. And they reasoned that no one had gone into that cave because the spider web was there. Later on, the Christian came out and walked through the spider's web. He realized why the soldiers had not come in, and he said this, with God, a web is as a wall, but without God, a wall is just as a spider's web. You get that? I mean, a web, something as simple as that, can look like a wall when God's in control. But man, even if you have a wall, if God's not in charge, this is like as easy as going through a spider web. Got to depend on God. Here's a key thought in your notes. It says this, and I think the Lord takes great pleasure, guys, in taking the most difficult situations in life, some of those that seem humanly impossible to us, okay, and using those impossibilities as a way of increasing our faith in His unlimited capabilities. I just think He does. Guys, I was on a phone call last night. One of the guys who was in my youth group years and years ago, and he's married, has 3 kids, but his 3-year-old son has some surgery, and they expected 2 days to a week, and his son would be fine and get to return home. Well, he's in the National Guard, and they have moved from Pittsburgh to Cape May, New Jersey. So they're 6 hours, 7 hours from where the surgery was. They've moved during this time frame. He called me last night. His name is Todd, and I told him I was going to talk about him this morning. And he was frustrated. He's upset. He doesn't know what to do because it's been a month now almost, and his son's not getting better. He's still in the hospital. He's still having these problems that he had, and it's all intestinal type stuff. He's 3, so it's not going to explain it to him, and he's struggling. He has to go back home today and leave his wife and all his kids there at a Ronald McDonald house so he can go back to work while his kids and his family are still in Pittsburgh, 6.5 hours, 7 hours away. And he doesn't know what to do. He's just frustrated. And I'm telling you guys, and we had a great conversation. By the time we got off the phone, I really felt like Todd had moved forward some steps. He said, he said, Randy, I'll be honest, I've been backsliding. I've not been in church much. I've not been in, he said, and so we had a good conversation about what, maybe this is God just kind of encourage him, maybe, and he's not using his son's sickness, but this is sort of something that can motivate him to be more in his relationship, be stronger, and to be praying a little bit more, and to be more concerned about these things. And I'm telling you, I think he's taken a difficult situation in Todd's life, and he's using this to increase his faith in God's capabilities versus his own capabilities. Because as a father, he wants to take care of this. He wants to get his son home. He wants to get him out of the hospital. He wants to do this. And he can't do this. And he has got to the point now where he knows, okay, let's start putting this in God's unlimited capabilities. We get to verse 23 in the story, and it says the king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Nothing, not even a scratch. I can't even hold a kitten without getting a scratch. He's there with lions and nothing, not a scratch on him. See, throughout Scripture, I think we learn that temptations and trials of life are to be responded to. not to run away from them. We have to respond to them. We can't just run away from everything that happens. We have to respond to them. We can't just try to avoid them. I think we need, or we can't even just try to meet them in the power of our own abilities. No, I think the closer we draw to God, the stronger we're going to be when situations happen. Conversation I had with Todd last night. He's not been very close with God. He doesn't feel very powerful right now. He feels weak because he's moved away from God. The closer we can draw near to God, I think the stronger our faith will be. Let's look through a couple of scriptures here. Hebrews chapter 11. Some things that kind of reinforce this, I think. Hebrews 11, verse 32 through 34. It says, "And what more shall I say?" So the writer says, "I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weaknesses was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies." Says, hey, the closer you are to God, the stronger you're going to be. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 and 9. This is a passage of Scripture that's familiar to a lot of us probably when we hear it. But as a reminder, it says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him," it says, "standing firm in the faith." 1 John chapter 5, verses 3 through 4. It says, "In fact, this is love for God, to keep His commands. And His commands are not burdensome. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith." So, how do you triumph over trial or temptation in your life? By having faith in God. That's how Daniel triumphed. That's how he stood strong. And that's how we're to do as well. See, Daniel had the confident assurance that God would deliver him one way or the other. I really think if Daniel was going in that lion's den thinking, well, if I die, guess what? I'm going right to heaven anyway. He wasn't worried about it. If he lived, he could give glory to God. See, most of us don't trust God like Daniel, though. I mean, we're often terrified by what we find ourselves in, the situations we find ourselves. We're terrified by those. And our faith in God sometimes is just weak. It's just weak. So then, how do we have the kind of faith that Daniel has? Well, how do we face that pack of ravenous lions